So we are recording now, right? Okay, so welcome everybody. As we have announced, this is the first international Gerpisa seminar of the year. So the first session in English of our annual seminar series. We're happy to have you here. As you can see this, and we had announced as well, this is our first attempt to shift from all virtual seminars to an hybrid format. It is still a challenge to have fully in-person events and to move to physical meetings, but we are now based at the ULB, so the University of Brussels, and we will continue meeting here, while we will still use the opportunity to connect to all of you, so the network that Gerpisa has around the world. So this is still a function, an opportunity that we want to continue seizing. So welcome today. We have a first presentation by Professor Saon from ICRIER, so the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations based in New Delhi. And I'm very happy to have her here because not only, I mean, India is a country case that is particularly dear to me, as I also worked for several years on India, and it's not easy to include it within our range of topics. So we have attempted several times, and so I'm very glad that we managed to include it in this annual series. On the other side, I'm particularly glad that we'll have this presentation today, global value chains from autos to EVs with a focus on the Indian experience, because this topic responds to a combination of research interests that are strongly present within Gerpisa. On the one hand, we have recently launched a working group with a strong focus on global value chains and the auto industry in emerging economies. So we are interested also in developing further the focus on the global south. And on the other side, we have a large group within the Gerpisa that studies the process of electrification across countries. So in this regard, we will have a focus on both. We will have a specific focus on an issue that within the Gerpisa working group number 2, so our working group on global value chains, is also of interest, namely the process of industrialization through global value chains integration, and an analysis of what are the main constraints to participation into global value chains. Saon will build here, I understand, you will explain better, but will build here on a previous volume that she published in 2018, Global Value Chains and the Missing Links, an analysis of India's integration into global value chains through an investigation of several industrial sectors, of which one was the automotive, and recent work on the policies to promote EVs in India. So she will outline the trajectory first from a broader focus to narrow down to the case of EVs. And I will leave the floor now to you for about 40-45 minutes, then we will continue with a discussion. I leave it to you. Thank you very much. You're free to share your screen. We're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenza. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Thank you for this opportunity to present my work. I will be talking about global value chains in autos and EVs, the experience of India. This is a brief outline of the presentation that I will be making. I'll be first talking about the auto industry in the Indian context. Enough has been written about it. But I will actually talk about how the integration has happened in particularly in GVCs, the challenges and the opportunities that still remain. Then come to the EV value chain in the Indian context, and again talk about the challenges and the opportunities, and then close the presentation. So to start with, enough has been written about the auto industry in India. It's one of the largest manufacturing sectors of the country. The automobile industry is a capital, as is well known, the automobile industry is a capital and a technology intensive industry. It requires huge investments in sales and marketing, after sales services and quality assurance. And the peculiarity of this industry is that it is neither fully global nor fully local. It really consists of a set of specialized clusters, but it is not tied down by the narrow geography of nations. Because of the nature of the industry, the parts are heavy, they are big, and they are very difficult to transport. So you need global value chains, but you need to also localize them. And that is what most countries have been trying to do. In terms of the Indian automobile sector, it is the second fastest growing market after China. And often we hear about the extraordinary talent bases of firms in India, and many companies, in fact, like GE, have set up their R&D centers in India. The growth of the automobile industry in India is based on homegrown firms, but it has actually happened through FDI, and we have the case of Maruti way in the 80s, Maruti Suzuki setting up their factory for the first time, and then other firms like the Hyundai and etc. setting up their factories. But we have homegrown firms like Mahindra and the Ashok Leyland, etc., who have also dominated the space and really cater to a large part of the domestic market. As far as best practices are concerned, the absorption of technology as well as certain design has been slower in India compared to other markets like China. And it's a very important pillar for the Indian economy because of the strong backward and the forward linkages that it has. And basically the contribution to GDP has been quite significant. It's from about 3% in 1992-93 to about 7%, and then about 6% now, and 6.4% now. It provides employment to about 37 million people, directly 8 million people, and indirectly 29, which is a very important aspect of the industrialization process in India. And it has been touted that India is fast turning into a global automotive hub. I'll just put a disclaimer here that while this may be true, there are not too many brands, Indian brands, that are known globally, except for maybe the Tata and the Mahindra. And I'll come back to this point when I discuss the challenges. In terms of the total exports, there were about 56,17246 vehicles that were exported in 2021-22. And the domestic sales, of course, was much, much larger. And that figure is also given here. Now, just turning to this slide here, on the right, we see the share of world market by sector for the Indian industries. And the line that is blue, third from the bottom line, is the one which shows the automotive industry. Its share has been rising, but it is quite small compared to the shares of the other industries. And on the left, what you have is the product space of the Hausman, from the Hausman et al. Product space. And again, you can see here the blue dots are the ones which are representative of the automotive industry. And the blue dots are actually much, much smaller than the other yellow dots which stand for agriculture, or the purple dots which stand for chemicals. So it is an important industry, but in terms of exports, etc., and the product space, it is not that important. The automotive industry, in fact, represents one of the most successful cases of GVC integration for India. And I will come to that when I talk about the GVC integration. This again shows the share of the different sectors of India's export in 2019. And you can see that it is dominated by the purple one on top, which is the chemicals and pharmaceuticals, followed by refined petroleum, and then diamonds and other things. The ones for vehicles is the one on that is which has a car. You can see that, and the cars are about 2.17%, and the vehicle parts are about 1.46%. And together, this sector is important, but obviously it's much smaller than the other sectors, which was also shown in the graph that I showed in the previous slide. And I'll come back to the point about the vehicle parts in a moment, and when I talk about the value chain. So turning to GVCs and automobiles, the global integration has advanced as firms have sought to leverage their engineering capacities across products and to sell in multiple markets. The value chain is, as is well known, is producer driven. Lead firms are very important. Conceptualization and design are very critical in the manufacture of the car, and these are the high value additions segments. But the automobile chain also has some medium and some low value addition segments. And when I talk about the value chain, I'll talk about that in the Indian context. I'll lay emphasis on which parts are by high value added as opposed to the others. And some of these functions, particularly the high value added ones, are actually concentrated in the company's headquarters if it is an MNC. But it also requires that, as suppliers have to play a larger role in design. And so there is a lot of collaboration. So we have the OEMs and the tier 1, tier 2, etc. And this is typical of the automobile value chain. Turning to components, the auto component market has to develop simultaneously as an MNC car manufacturer goes into a country. And the SME suppliers, they have to, the OEMs particularly have to rely on a large number of first tier suppliers who will supply some of the bulky parts and other parts, and the localization in some sense increases as the industry matures in a country and it starts producing more and more cars. And this is the value chain of the automobile. This is actually largely taken from the Indian case, but I think it is applicable to other countries also. So starting from the left, you have the design, which is a high value added function. Then the raw materials, which is low value added function. The parts, which are medium value added, to assembly and marketing and finally distribution. So the assembly of engines, electronic and technologically advanced parts and marketing are very high value added, and but have to be mostly undertaken at the local level, again, because of the nature of the industry, which involves these bulky parts, which cannot be very easily transported, and the costs are significant in doing so. As far as the Indian industry is concerned, there have been some barriers which have been pointed out, and this was actually part of a survey that we did when we were writing, when we did this work for the global value chains and the missing links. The survey was done around 2014-15. So one has to apply that caveat, keep that caveat in mind, that there were some connectivity issues, particularly the turnaround in ports was not very fast. There were issues regarding land availability, and then certain prices have been quite high. Some of these issues have been resolved, and in recent times, because of India's focus on various things, including what is called a production linked incentive scheme, which I will talk about when I talk about the EV sector. And the connectivity also has improved significantly, but there are some bottlenecks that still remain. So coming to the integration as far as GVCs is concerned. So as we all know that participation is given by the backward and the forward linkages. And while India's backward linkage is slightly higher than the forward linkage, in comparison to other developing countries, or it's quite low. And India has still remained actually a fringe player with only about $241 billion of or 1.5% of global GVC exports. This is in 2017. And but there are some industries where the value addition as well as the integration have been higher. And we know some of these cases. The automobile industry is one such case where integration has been higher compared to some of the other industries. So participation, of course, is determined by three factors given by Taglioni and Winkler. The capacity of a country to join a GVC, it depends on the tasks that the country and the firms can perform. The capacity to remain in the GVC, and this really boils down to the question of competitiveness. And in the Indian context, what we have to keep in mind that competitiveness actually is a very multidimensional kind of a variable. So you have to have not only price and cost competitiveness, but you have to have material competitiveness and other competitiveness in as far as doing R&D, etc. are concerned. And in some of those, and logistics, etc., all of those add up to competitiveness. And so it's really, one needs to unpack this a bit. And this becomes very important again when I'll talk about the EV sector. This point about competitiveness will become even important because materials become very important in the EV case. The third, of course, is the capacity to move up the value chain. So as firms integrate their value chains, they have to upgrade, and there is the role of the lead firms in that. And of course, then it also depends on the nature of the technology that is prevalent in the sector. So as far as the auto sector is concerned, what are the challenges and the opportunities? One of the challenges, which I'll talk about COVID in a moment, but even before COVID, what we had is disruptions due to electric mobility, driverless cars, and other kinds of issues like ride sharing and people buying less and less cars. COVID, of course, has amplified the risks that are inherently present in global value chains, and the whole concept of just-in-time has been questioned for that. And what it has emphasized is the need for resilience of supply chains and local sourcing, and the need for risk management in order to mitigate all of this, as well as new supply measures. Of course, not only every country in the world was affected by COVID, but you see that, of course, some countries initially, at least in the initial part of 2020, you saw some countries affected more, and then they came out of it relatively quickly compared to other countries. So what COVID actually exposed is that it showed that there were the key supply chain components were in short supply, as most of the production centers were in Southeast Asia and China, and which initially, because all countries went through some form of lockdown and there were disruptions in the supply chains, this became very, very important. And what it has also shown is that the concepts of just-in-time and etc. has reduced basically the inventory levels needed for that. People have reduced that, but resilience became a very important factor in maintaining supply chains, and this again COVID highlighted that. Now, the lack of supply chain transparency also made it difficult to identify and respond to COVID situations. And the critical thing that has happened because of all of this, that supply chain management itself has changed vastly due to the pandemic. And the assumptions that we made prior to the pandemic may not hold again also in the future. And so not only if there is another kind of a shock, but the whole resilience concept of resilience becomes very important. because of that. Now I'll come to the electric value chain. Now, in comparison to the automotive value chain, the EV value chain in the Indian context is quite nascent. It is quite small, and this graph basically shows you what the the uptake has been as far as the domestic sales of EVs. Now, you will notice that it is actually largely dominated by two-wheelers. And the very small thing on top of the each of those bars are actually the four-wheeler. The four-wheeler story has really not taken off in India. It is actually largely dominated by two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And and there are some figures that you can see on the left. That's about 22,000 in 15-16 to about 155,000 in 1920. But even in comparison to the automotive sales, this is really, really very small. Now, coming to the EV value chain, the graph on top shows the EV value chain. So you start from raw materials to battery production to vehicle production, and then followed by the EV service, sorry, excuse me, and EV component recycling. And at the bottom of the graph, what you have is how the EV basically works. So that the battery basically supplies power to the motor, and then through which the gearbox and differentiator, etc., they transfer the power to the wheels. And in all of this, the critical difference between the auto and the EV comes from the BMS, the battery management system, which plays a very important role. And there are actually three things that are involved in the EV powertrain. So one is the battery. Most often it is a lithium-ion battery, and but it could have various kinds of chemistries involved. Then there are the motors, and then there are the electronics and the intelligence systems. As far as the battery itself is concerned, there are two parts of the battery, the anode and the cathode. And India, in fact, has some materials like graphite for the anode. But as far as the cathode is concerned, most of the metals that are required for the cathode, the nickel, the cobalt, the lithium, etc., are not found in the country. So this is a very important problem or barrier in the Indian context. So EVs basically require more minerals than conventional cars. And this is basically because of the battery itself, because the battery uses more minerals. And while the EV storage technology is evolving, there are certain presently various technologies which are being used. The most common, of course, is the lithium ion, but there are experiments that are going on with other kinds of batteries. And given the short supply of not only lithium, but other metals worldwide, various other kinds of things are being experimented with. As far as manufacturing of advanced batteries is concerned in India, India is really at the infancy kind of a stage. And what is needed is a lot of R&D, a lot of collaboration. And of course, there will be other things that become very important, things like recycling, etc. And I will talk about those also when I talk about the challenges. So one of the most critical things as far as the cathode is concerned is this, or the lithium-ion battery is concerned, is lithium. And lithium worldwide is found in very few countries. So the table actually shows you the lithium by production as well as by the reserves. And you can see that it is actually South America that dominates as far as both production as well as reserves. But interestingly, a lot of production actually happens in China, and it is very well known that China, in fact, controls a large part of the lithium value chain. Apart from batteries, of course, lithium is used in other industries, and this graph on the left actually shows you some of the other industries where lithium is used, for example, ceramics and glasses and etc. Now, how does an ICE engine compare with an EV engine? And so what I've tried to do here is that I've tried to list out some of the parts which are common. And the one you can see at the bottom is the gearbox, which is common. But the ICE engine has a clutch or a torque control system. It has a start-stop system. It has pistons and spark plugs and turbochargers. And none of these are typically required or are necessarily a part of the EV engine. So the EV engine actually has these parts. The
Buenos
BMS,
días.
sorry. Was there a question?
No problem. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, so the BMS, which I talked about, the battery management system, but apart from that, you have these the vehicle interface control module system, the EV communication controller system, the DC-DC converter, and then the other power distribution modules. So a large part of the EV is actually is the management of the battery and managing the electric current. And although the EV vehicle, in comparison to the ICE engine, has only about 20 moving parts in comparison to about 10,000 moving parts in the ICE engine, it is actually electronically a much more sophisticated product, and it requires skills and precision which are not necessarily found in the country, particularly the electronic systems. And so this is basically what the EV battery economy looks like. And just this is a kind of a overview, a snapshot. So the cell and the battery pack manufacturing require raw materials and an intermediary supply chain. Then you go on to, you can use that again for once the life of the battery is over for charging or swapping. And then you have the vehicle to and a second use after the life is over. And again, of course, the end of life and the battery recycling feedback into the supply. So it is one of the things one has been pointed out is that while India may not actually have the minerals, it may not be a problem because you may be actually able to recycle a lot of batteries, but for that you need a very healthy policy towards battery swapping and battery recycling, and that is still nascent stage in the country. In this table, what I've tried to do is that just give a snapshot of the EV parts that are imported into the country. And it is interesting to see that as far as the manufacturing of the automobile or the vehicle is concerned, while that has gone down slightly, the battery storage has increased, and the other parts have the electronic components, etc., also have increased, but the raw materials for the battery have gone down. So I'm not really sure that what is happening here. Maybe it's picking up something that I'm not really sure at this stage, the message that is coming out of this. So what are the gaps or the barriers that remain as far as the EV value chain is concerned? One is, of course, the technology, because the technology is not present in the country. The motors, of course, the motors, the type of motors depend on the application as far as the vehicle is concerned. The electronics, I talked about that. That is a very important part of the EV system. And so the battery and the motor manufacturing are both a gap in the Indian industry. And as far as battery is concerned, the most important thing is not having the materials, raw materials to produce the batteries, and which are largely imported. But then what India has been doing is that it has been importing cells, and then we've had some incidents where the packing may not have been done well, and there have been incidents of fire, some particularly in two-wheelers. So the separator may not have been of high quality, etc. So standards as far as all of this is concerned are yet to evolve, and those are concerns as far as the EV value chain is concerned. Coming to policy, there has been a very aggressive policy by the government of India, initially from the what is called the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan. The faster adoption and manufacturing of hybrid vehicles, the FAME schemes were launched initially in 2015 to 2019 and then extended. FAME has had two phases, FAME 1 and FAME 2. And then very recently, last year, what we had is what is called the Production Linked Incentive Scheme for advanced cell chemistry. And so with FAME 2 and the PLI in advanced cell chemistry and PLI in automotives, it is envisaged that this has created some kind of enabling environment for a globally competitive ecosystem in India. But there are some problems that still remain. This has been one of the very aggressive policies followed by the federal government, and state governments have also chipped in with their measures. About 19 to 20 states have announced an EV policy. And so there are 5 kinds of incentives that states have also provided. So supply side incentives, which relate to manufacturing, exemptions and waivers, or supporting infrastructure, investment and finance related. Then on the demand side, there are purchase related, post-purchase related, awareness related measures. There have been measures related to relating to the labor side, basically employment related and skilling related. And then there have been incentives for R&D, and finally the battery swapping, recycling, those kinds of policies also have been put in place. But the question that is forefront at the moment is that the PLI in ACC, in fact, was awarded to about 4 firms. And with the idea is that we would have about 20 gigawatt of batteries coming out of that. It was the policy was oversubscribed. In fact, many more than 4 firms were had applied, but it was allotted to 4 firms. But we are still in the first year of that scheme. So it remains to be seen whether the scheme is actually working on the ground, or how much of success it will achieve. And the question that comes from the GVC literature is that enough to create lead firms, or have, I mean, how could you have basically the value chain in the country? And what was evident in the case of the auto, that the brands were not very well known outside of India. Here, in the case of EV, it is a much more basic kind of question, because you would have functional upgrading only after you have some product and process upgrading. So, and we haven't reached that stage yet as far as the EV is concerned. So the challenges and opportunity, a huge amount of investment will be required. And there are some projections which have been made by Niti Aayog and the Rocky Mountain Institute. So some figures have been given that, you know, if we want to achieve the target that has been set out in the NEMMP, this is the kind of investment that will be required to achieve that. And so it's about, and others have in fact said that the investment that would be required would be about $180 billion. And the investment that has started coming in is actually quite minuscule compared to the targets that have been set out either by the Niti Aayog or as part of the PLI scheme. And then other challenges remain. For example, in the FAME 2 subsidy, it was one case that has come out very recently is that some firms which were expected to localize much more were actually importing from China and availing of the subsidy, but not localizing to the extent that was mandated to avail the subsidy. So that the FAME 2 has in fact run into this kind of a loophole, and the subsidy to 2 firms have been stopped as a result. Now, this is from a survey that was done when we did this study in ICRIER. Basically, we talked about 59 stakeholders in the EV space. And regarding what were their concerns as far as the supply chain and the EV ecosystem. And so you can see the left panel shows you that the availability and price of battery cells was touted to be the most important barrier as far as the supply chain is concerned, EV ecosystem is concerned. And on the right, what you can see that they've talked about many kinds of problems, but starting from fuel emission standards. But the main thing, the most important barrier that has come out is that there is a clear absence, an absence of clear targets for the EV uptake. And this has been touted as one of the most important problem in the context of EVs. So the concerns that remain as far as both ICE and EV are concerned. So on the one hand, as far as the ICE engines are concerned, I've talked about this before, that the brands are not well known. It is actually largely catering to the domestic market, though Indian automobiles do sell in many geographies, but it is quite small compared to the domestic market. 80% of India's exports are in engine and powertrain, and these items are likely to become redundant or obsolete in a very short time. What you would need is actually, with the EVs, advent of EVs, you would need the EV powertrain. And there we have no competitiveness or bandwidth. And as far as competitiveness is concerned, India actually, the cost of manufacturing, etc., and other issues, logistics, etc., have always been touted to be a problem. And this has been touted as one of the reasons why India has failed to integrate into global value chains. As on part of the EVs, we've seen that technology, of course, is a very important factor. And while a lot of FDI is required, a lot of R&D needs to be done, and not enough is being done in the country. And as far as supply chains are concerned, since we don't have the critical minerals, we don't have many of the other things, the electronics part of it, a large part of that, the ecosystem is actually yet to develop. And it is largely a public sector or a public government-driven approach. And private firms are, they have come and they have, invested in the PLI and or applied for the PLI and all that, but it is still driven by the government largely. So just to finish off, this is basically the book that we are writing on EVs, and this is the organization of the book. It has 5 parts. So starting with the introduction, then upstream we talk about minerals and technology. Then in part 3 we talk about manufacturing and assembly, and part 4 talk about the ecosystem, and part 5 concludes with the policy gaps and lacuna and the regulations that remain. That's all from my side. Thank you for your attention.
No, there's no webcam anymore.
There is no? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Let's take that again.
So we go back to you,
Yeah.
waiting for Evelyn more.
Okay, sorry for these technical issues, but thank you very much, Saon, for your very interesting and comprehensive presentation. We also look forward to seeing like the final, how this volume develops. When it's done, we will be happy to advertise it and to organize a presentation later on. For the moment, so I will start throwing a few questions out there. They are related also, they're also aimed at highlighting some general traits of the Indian industry for those who don't know the Indian industry, okay? So I will leave these questions with you. You're free to answer, and then we open the floor to questions from the audience. We have quite a few people that connected online. You can see the people connected anytime, because we really have people connecting from the States to Japan, as we can see those we know. So a wide representation of the Gerpisa network. So I will start with my questions. One is, if you could give an idea, even if you don't have precise numbers, but to our listeners, if you could give an idea of the scope of the Indian industry in terms, not exact numbers, but the proportion of OEMs, tier 1, tier 2 component suppliers, to understand the overall structure of the local supply chain. Because compared to, I mean, I recently studied different countries, but compared to other countries, India has a very developed supplier base. There are not, also including small suppliers that generally are not easy to track because many are informal. But it's important to give an idea of the scope and the whole overall structure of the local supply chain. Another one, and these are still questions related to the Indian auto industry in general, before going to EV strategies. Another one is, if you could define main factors of competitiveness and weaknesses of local manufacturers, both OEMs and component manufacturers, in terms of local capabilities, to share this with others. I mean, not everyone is familiar with this industry. There is, as you had highlighted, several people wrote on it, but in terms of what reaches outside of India, generally is not much. So if you could highlight what are the most developed local capabilities, and on the other side, what are the biggest weaknesses in terms of local manufacturing base. Third issue that is more theoretical, and that I mean, my colleague Martin Schroeder is here. We are developing a project together on GVC integration of auto industries in the Global South. I would like to launch to you an argument that is GVC integration really the best model for a country like India? In a sense that one common argument from a Global South perspective is that GVC integration can definitely or ideally produce spillover effects, linkages, but often does not lead to good quality growth, industrial growth and development. So often many countries in the Global South that increase participation to global value chains then are pushed into low value added or not high quality segments, whereby a country like India can focus on a huge domestic market that also is also based on clusters with decent local capabilities. So to what extent the GVC integration is really the best model for India, while possibly clustering policies can lead to better linkages and better sustainability also of the growth generated. Fourth, on EVs, besides the technologies available and the main barriers to developing this value chain, my question here would be, could you explain to others a bit more of the demand side? So what are the models produced, but who buys them? What are the prices? Because one strength in India that's compared to what we've seen in other countries, that in the end try and invest and support and deliver also incentives to develop the electrification, to transition to EVs, but then the prices are so high that most of the volumes only cater certain segments of consumers and are not affordable. India has insisted, as in general, the auto industry in India, on smaller segments, so lower segments that are more affordable than others. So if you could tell us about the structure of the demand, what is different in India? Another, then you select what you want. Another is if you could tell us a bit more of infrastructure, because We've seen that one main obstacle to electrification is the availability of charging stations and infrastructure. But in India, there's a big problem that is congestion of roads. I mean, I remember being stuck for hours. How do you do? How is this an obstacle, and what are the solutions thought in terms of infrastructure provision? And last, you mentioned a series of incentives to promote electrification, and the two of these are employment and skilling. Can you tell us a bit more of what these exactly entail? I'm very curious to hear. I'll stop it here. You can answer, and then we collect other questions from the floor. I will probably leave the screen. You will see Tommaso, but I'm hearing. I'm listening next to this computer. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let me just talk about some of the questions that you've raised. So the first question in terms of the proportion, I don't have numbers offhand. So, but as is well known, the OEMs are, in terms of size, etc., obviously are much larger. But the tier 1, tier 2 there are many firms, and they are usually the smaller firms. But I can't give you any numbers offhand that what is the proportion in terms of value added or sales. Second question in terms of the main factors of capabilities that you talked about in the context of auto, and then where do we lack? The capability on the auto case is basically coming from its India's strength in casting forging, and which is why some of these parts which are related to the engine, etc., have been parts which in India has been doing well, but these are all related to the ICE engine. Where India has been lacking, particularly recently, it has made up somewhat, but is in the electronics part of it, and mostly for the auto ICE engine. All the electronics initially was imported, but of late I'm hearing that some things are being done in the country. So in terms of capabilities, the electronic part is the weakest link as far as the ICE engine is concerned. Now, whether GVC is the best model for integration, well, the problem is that, and as you pointed out, that with GVC integration, you not only get technology, you get FDI and other things, but whether the cluster-led model is also the suitable model for India, that is also something that is of an issue. And so if one looks at the the way the auto industry has developed, it has actually developed because of the initial entry of Suzuki in the 1980s, and then the government policy which enabled that FDI to come in, and then localization then increased. Initially, everything except the tires that the Maruti car had were imported from Japan, but then now I hear that apart from 2-3 components, nothing else is imported. Everything is made in the country. Now, so is GVC the best model? It's difficult to answer, but what alternative is there? I mean, especially in the case, if we look at the case of EV, there is no other route to my mind of integration, of development of the industry, given that you neither have the technology, you neither have the materials, so I'll leave it at that. On the demand side, right, so the price of the EV, as well as there was a question about the tuk-tuks also, I saw that. The two-wheelers and three-wheelers are still obviously dominating, but there is both a formal and an informal kind of a EV market. So a large part of the small, the three-wheelers particularly, are, the battery part of it is that it's like the material is, the kit is imported, and then there's some or some kind of addition is done to that, and then it is used in the three-wheeler. Often these the way this is done is it's a problem, and we've had incidents with fire, as I mentioned, in two-wheelers particularly, not in three-wheelers. But the large part of the industry is, the sales that have happened are in the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers. The price, even for us, for a two-wheeler, there is still a differential of about 20,000 rupees as far as, even with the subsidy, between EV vehicle and ICE vehicle. And that differential is actually quite large. And one of the reasons why four-wheelers the uptake has been quite small is because of the price. And in fact, it's about, in Indian rupees, it is about 16 lakh rupees, which is much, much higher than you'd get a good ICE car at half that price. So it is definitely a very, very expensive car at the moment. Plus, the other issue that you raised, that what about the infrastructure, the charging? Now, most of the charging is actually available in the large cities, and it is not available in the countryside. So the way people have been using EVs is that they've been buying either two-wheelers or three-wheelers, not really cars. And where it requires, you require much lower charging, and you can use it for short distances. Or it is the second vehicle. So you have a primary vehicle, which is an ICE vehicle, and you have a second vehicle, which is the EV, and you are only using the EV in the cities where the charging is ensured. Now, there is a lot of emphasis that all states are giving on charging. They are also trying to charge some parts of highways are being charged, but it is still at a very, very small scale that this is happening. So this is definitely one of the pain points, the charging infrastructure. Congestion is something that I don't think we can help, given the design of our cities. So, but then I hear that with a charge, ICE vehicle, an EV vehicle, or a scooter can actually, it can run up to 80 kilometers. So which is, normally you wouldn't need more than that. And in cities, it is less of a problem finding, in some cities at least, it's less of a problem finding a charging station. Of course, that's not the story outside of the cities. The skilling and the employment, the final question. So so one of the things that has been recognized is that there are gaps as far as the skill requirement is concerned. Obviously, because the ICE engine and the EV, there are very different kinds of skill sets. So one is recognizing that certain skills will become redundant, and certain new skills need to be learned by people who are not only going to manufacture the EVs, but also there is a requirement for repair of vehicles if a vehicle breaks down. So a person who is a mechanic has to be able to repair that. So there's also recognition of that. The skilling that has been done or is being tried is through the Automotive Skill Council, and certain courses or curriculum have been designed, which have been for part of, so that the engineering graduates, etc., are learning those skills. But other than that, what a lot of state governments are also doing is that they are trying to build an awareness, because you are going once, and the most important thing in a EV vehicle as compared to an ICE vehicle is that there is an electric charge, and unless that is handled properly, it can lead to accidents. It could lead to deaths. So one has to be very, I hear that the entire people on the shop floor, everybody needs to know how to handle that electric current. And even the guard in the factory needs to know how to disable the charge in case something goes wrong. So it's a whole new skill set. So skill sets of many kinds of people have to be improved. So we aren't there yet, but I think some thinking has started happening on that way. I see that there are some other questions in the chat, and I can start with those if you want, or I am free to take other questions.
Yes, we have shift microphone. Can you hear fine?
Yes, yes.
Okay, very good. It should be, so we should be able to speak freely, hopefully. Hopefully it works. So do you have access to the question in the chat, so you can go ahead if you want to pick some and answer them? Is that okay? Or do you want us?
Right. I can see the chat. I can see the chat.
And of course we can, then we'll open the question and answer to the people that are connected as well, people in the room with us.
Yes. There is this question from Margarita about the renewable sources. Yeah. So India actually has been, doing very well on renewables. So obviously the question is that you're not green if you actually use EVs, but then you use the electricity to charge the EVs if it comes from coal, right? This is a very important issue. And as far as the renewable space is concerned, actually India has been, as far it has made its commitments as to the UNFCCC, and it's ahead of the targets that it has set for itself on renewables. So it's doing very well there. But I think a lot of solar manufacturing in India, the renewable part is actually coming from solar, not so much from wind. It has increased, the prices have come down, but the electricity supply from the grid is still largely dominated by coal and hydel. So it's renewables is only about 20% or so, not more than that. If off the cuff, I think that is the figure that I remember. So recycling is yeah. So no, I am not sure I know the answer to the second question. So I would have to get back on this. So I'm not sure that what are we implying? Are we importing used batteries, or I think it means that we are going to reuse the used battery, the batteries that we have. We are going to reuse them. I don't think we are envisaging importing used batteries, but I'm not sure about this.
Well, thank you very much for this excellent presentation and very detailed and precise answers to so many questions. Are there any other questions in the Zoom or here in the room? I see Joy who has a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, one moment. Hi, can you see me?
Yes.
Hi, Saon, it's very interesting presentation. I learned a lot about India and also the previous questions. I forgot her name, but she really relate a lot of interesting questions. So I just have a couple of inquiries that I pick it up from both sides about the global South relation and so forth. So perhaps you can share a bit detail. What will be the relation between global South and global South? Perhaps, between India and ASEAN, such as Thailand and Indonesia and Vietnam and so forth. In general, it could be the auto parts, it could be the type of manufacturing, because it is my understanding that at least in ASEAN, there are some integration to some extent. But some of my research participants claim that they also exported some of the parts or machine or engine to India and assembled together. And in terms of the EV, I think you addressed very well. I think for those who conducting research in global South, this is not easy to answer, but we still able to identify the issue and so forth. So I'll give you an example on the EV here in Tokyo. I haven't seen a lot of charging points. When I'm from New York City, in New York, it just started it. You know, it's the incentive from the government first to provide the infrastructure and so forth. And you're right, in Global South, for example, we have to be mindful that the energy itself, like in Europe now, perhaps, they're not reliable, you know, but the most important part is the human being, how they're going to use it, how they're going to maintain it, because to build something and to keep working on it and how to use it is just different story. Because I was in Shenzhen, so it was quite different too. So the third and the last point I'd like to also reiterate to your point, Saon, is the human being. It could be the workforce, it could be the after sale, so like the workforce you have described. This is a new entire spectrum of production. That's what I have learned, at least from Indonesia, and I share the commonality with Indian case. And after sale, this is also another interesting part, because after sale, you know, like we in Indonesia or in Thailand, for example, they have some exported vehicle from India or China, but the end user value it differently. So they see it already, they expect it, it's a low cost, and they would expect the maintenance is also high. So as a result, they don't have a good parts or network for, you know, license for this after sale. So instead they go to the Japanese stuff and they don't have available parts. So as a result, they just use whatever the available parts, and by the end, the vehicle falling apart. So this kind of a cycle thing that, you know, about the EV and the Global South product and so forth. So perhaps you can just share your view about the Global South and Global South relationship in terms of export or manufacturing and so forth. Thank you, Saon.
Thank you. Yes, so India, in fact, has a free trade agreement with the ASEAN countries. And automotives are a very important part of the relations between India and Thailand, particularly because India actually does import a lot of things from Thailand, things that in automobiles which are not manufactured in India. But as far as the ASEAN is concerned, India does have good relations with many of the countries, Vietnam, but many of the countries are also our competitors. I mean, I'll give an example that Vietnam is also a competitor as far as other industries are concerned. So India does have quite good relations with the ASEAN countries, but in some other markets, we are also competing and we are competitors. And definitely we are not India is not part of Factory Asia. So which ASEAN is, and the ASEAN countries are. So so that it is, I think, the relations are good, but it could be better. The only country with whom we have a problem in the Global South, not the only country, I would say, right? In recent times, the country that we've had problems is, of course, China. And we are very careful now about our engagement with China.
Okay, thank you very much. I see just a further question in the chat, if you want to have a look, is about the mobility, collective mobility to reduce congestion, or is there a plan or a scheme in India that address the issues of, because we know that basically there are two ways to deal with these problems of reducing the impact of transports, in particular of person on the environment. One is the electrification and keeping individual mobility, and then you just go electrify. But another possible way is to change the way we move and the way we share and the way we use of the different types of mobility. So perhaps the question is this solution discussed or
right? No, so in fact, this has been one of the driving forces, the mobility plan for, and each state government as well as cities are going ahead with that. So the idea is that there are 2-3 kinds of things that happen. One is that most of the big cities now have a metro, and to encourage the public transport, and rather than use of the private cars and two-wheelers. Other than that, a large part of in fact, the EV initiative is coming from buses in cities. Buses, and increasingly I hear that many cities are planning to buy a lot of buses. In the city that I live, Delhi, the Delhi government has bought a lot of electric buses. So it is all part of the EV and the mobility plan that each city has for itself. So to reduce the over dependence on private transport, and to move a lot of people use so that a lot of people can use the public transport to to commute. But you have to also recognize that our cities are very dense and very congested, at least parts of it. So our biggest cities have, there are 10 million plus people. So, any transport system trying to cater to 10 million plus people is quite a challenge in itself. And the percentage of roads, etc. There's never enough roads. The more roads you build, the more cars you have, and that's the story everywhere. So, but trying to move people, I mean, one of the examples that I can give again from Delhi is that the success the Delhi Metro has had in moving. I mean, it's a huge distance that the metro covers, and it has really made affordable transport and very comfortable transport available to the people. And the EV part is also going to be part, EV buses, etc., could be part of that scheme for electric for mobility. But it's it started, but yet to sort of take off to that extent. So every city has a very grand plan of the metro plus buses and other things, and trying to move people out of private cars and two-wheelers.
Thank you very much. Are there other questions? Well, I can make one. I was thinking about possible struggle between North and South for the resources, because we know that the available materials, some critical materials, are not available in a great amount. And we see that, for example, with Europe, regulation is pushing to a very fast electrification. And we know Asia is controlling a lot of supply, in China in particular. So do you see geopolitical issues and how India is positioning as, I mean, does it see the supply of these materials as a geopolitical and critical challenge, or are there program or not? So that's my first question. And the second question is that if you look at, I don't know, a big Tesla car, and you compare that with what could be an average small car, low speed, that in India could provide affordable electrification. Well, basically the material you use to make the battery for one Tesla, but the same material you make batteries for 10 or 15 cars. And the technology that you need to develop to make that battery for the Tesla very efficient, according to having a very powerful car and very luxury one. Well, perhaps you don't need exactly the same type of battery when you equip a much smaller vehicle. Perhaps you need different technology. So my question is it's just not a matter of access to materials, but when you develop the technology, if you want to develop a technology for small, cheap, low-cost electromobility, you don't develop the same technology for top luxury cars. So is that going to be also an issue in terms of who will have the capacity to build the standards for the battery of tomorrow and to create this battery for low cost kind of electromobility?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I think I'll answer your second question first. So, India has had, and it's built, given the world, the nano, the cheapest small car. But as far as the EVs are concerned, I think there is a problem in the sense that the dynamics of the costing is not it's not similar to the dynamics of costing in a nice car. I mean, mainly because the battery cost is actually about 65% of the total cost of the vehicle, which means that whoever makes the battery efficiently, whether it's for a small car or a big car, is going to be able to do that more cost effectively. And therein comes the question of the raw materials, because one of the things that we've seen is that lithium prices, for example, really shot through the roof in recent times. One, because most countries are now trying to source lithium from whichever countries it is available. But the other materials also, cobalt or other kinds of materials, they are also not in great, I mean, very small amounts are available throughout the world, and very few countries actually have that. So to answer your first question, of course, it is it's a question of great geopolitical importance. India has actually put together a company, a government-owned company, which is going to source these materials, particularly lithium, from some of the South American countries. And keeping all the geopolitics in mind, I think every country is trying to do the same. So, in some sense, every country is trying to secure that small amount of lithium. We've had issues with problems as far as the, Democratic Republic of Congo is concerned. So, some countries have stopped buying from that country because of human rights and other issues. So it's a very important geopolitical concern, but it is something that concerns everybody. The only concern for India, I think, is that it does not even have the technology. So unless India does the R&D and does enough R&D to sort of develop new generation something beyond the lithium ion, something using the whatever else it has, it's not going to, we will not be able to make that small nano car or the counterpart to the small nano car in EV space.
Thank you very much for your answer. I was also really thinking in terms of, I mean, the whole debate of the responsibility of the global north in terms of global warming and the global south. And when we see these big electric cars, I think there is a political issue, because you create a huge battery that most of the time is full but not completely used. So the battery itself is underused, because most of the time you don't completely empty that, you don't completely charge that, but the capacity is there. And just because people can buy that, then the battery will go there. And if these resources are small in amount or relatively rare, then there will be a matter of justice. I mean, is that just that people in Europe or North America can have this 90 gigawatt battery and take away what would be enough to give the same amount of electric mobility to 10 families in small electric vehicles in China or whatever. So I think this might become an issue in terms of justice and just transitions and tension between countries and blocks in terms of it is just. And another issues that we discussed with Lorenza is that while Europe, for example, is going to have a ban on conventional cars, then the question arises, what is going to happen to the whole fleet of conventional cars that is in Europe? And then it needs to be, because people will not have access anymore to cities, it will be more expensive, there will be taxes on carbon, etc. But this fleet will still have value, but will not be able to be sold. So perhaps it's not an issue for India, but I think it's an issue for Africa, for instance. So when we're talking about global south, because Africa needs cars, and then will be a huge fleet of cars that it will be out of the market much earlier than normally would do. And you need, I mean, it still has a value, so you would shift it to Africa, for instance. And that you will shift the pollution with that, and you will shift all the, so that's, I think this electrification is raising new issues in terms of the geopolitical justice, climate justice, and whatever. And I think we will see more and more of that. So that's why I wanted also to have your point of view on these more general issues of access. And there is also Mike that wants to add a question. So perhaps I let Mike add his question, and then you, when you want, you can react.
Yes, I apologize. I came in late, so you may have covered the topic. But motorcycles and what in the Philippines, where I'm familiar, tricycles are a huge market. You know, Hero and Bajaj are major global producers, and those are relatively easy to electrify. The cost penalty is very small. The power grid needs are, you know, and on, and the componentry is already exists. So global tier ones, partly with R&D in India, you know, have developed that. So it would be easy to implement. My image of India is based on Philippine cities where there's huge congestion of these tricycles, motorcycles with sidecars. And it's also a very important means of transportation outside of Manila and a few big cities that have banned them. So just wondering if policy extends to that market and if anything is happening there.
Yeah, so in fact, that is the problem, because the policy, I mean, it does extend to three-wheelers also, but it hasn't really talked about the standards for batteries. And that is, in some sense, one of the problems. And I mean, the thing is that I've referred to this earlier, that there have been some incidents of fire with two-wheelers, the batteries catching fire. Not with three-wheelers, but the three-wheeler, you're right, that it has been largely an informal kind of a setting where people have put together different, I mean, a battery is easy to make in that sense. I mean, you're not looking at a lithium ion in that case. Maybe you are using the older lead acid batteries. So those do exist. And a lot of these small, you know, sort of informal sector is actually using many of these three-wheelers and developing these three-wheelers. But I think in that case also what we need is some kind of standards, because without that, what you have is very cheap things, definitely, but the hazards are also there. And you're not actually, you know, advancing the technology in that sense. You are putting something together, and it is an EV three-wheeler, but it's not going to help the industry upgrade or any of the other things.
Okay.
I guess I would view the ability to turn over the fleet from highly polluting in the Philippines, even two-cylinder or two-cycle, you know, gas motors to electric would be a very significant upgrading of technology. I mean, to me, technology is things that are get put into use and not you know, the bleeding edge of
No, sure. No, I meant that in the context of India. I'm not talking about the Philippines. Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. And in fact, we've had this with, you know, the two-wheelers also, that there was a kind of fuel that you could use earlier, which was more polluting, when one has moved to less polluting fuel. So even those are improvements, definitely. But all that I was trying to say is that, you know, as far as pollution is concerned, definitely a move will be better. But how are you generating the electricity also at the end of the day, right? Unless you're moving to more renewable, then you're not really greening the industry.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I have still some, but I'll wait for other people to raise their hands. No? About energy production, I mean, I didn't follow your presentation as I wanted because I was trying to solve some technical problems, sorry. So is there a plan in India to use nuclear energy because we know that there are problems with nuclear plants. We see China that is developing that a lot, but in the context of global warming, this is become more, you have to decide between two evils, but it seems that the evil of the nuclear waste is today a much less relevant issue than the problem of global warming. So is there a plan to keep the India of more, I don't know, of nuclear energy as a way to reduce dependence on coal and or is more like a renewable strategy for the energy? And then I had a question about we see in China now relatively cheap electric vehicles coming up, and the most sold electric vehicle in China last year was a $5,000 electric vehicle, if I'm not wrong, without even subsidized, and that is not far from what it would be a competitive price for India. And I know that Renault has started to sell, for instance, an electric vehicle in China. It's not been very successful, but for different reasons. If you want to know more, there is a presentation on the Gerpisa site on that by Marc Alochet on the last international colloquium, which is available. But this car is actually the Kwid. So they made the Kwid there are no Kwid for India, and then they decided to make the electrified version of the Kwid in China, which is called Spring, with the Chinese joint venture. And actually it's been quite successful and been re-imported to Europe. So now it's one of the best sold electric cars in Europe, the Spring cars. So that suggests that there might be some models that could be, even with existing technology, that could reach the kind of price in which they are competitive with internal combustion and giant cars in China. And also before that, I think this low-cost car in China are sort of official legal evolution of what was called before the low-speed vehicles, which have been very successful. I think we had something like 10 million low-speed vehicles sold per year, which were mostly legal vehicles, but were very successful, even in rural areas. So why is this developing in China as electric mobility? We know also that there are a lot of electric scooter or electric bicycle. And I mean, is there something similar developing in India? Are you afraid that perhaps Chinese products could take this part of the market, and if you let them in, would these kind of products make you think? What is your reaction to that?
So the first question on nuclear, I think nuclear is about only 2-3% of our energy right now, and there are two opposing views on nuclear. I mean, there are people who support nuclear, and there are people who have problems with nuclear. But I think the present gas crisis is showing us that nuclear does become a viable option in certain cases. And but India's plan actually for renewable is really the solar story, and India is trying to go increase or ramp up its renewables through the solar, not the nuclear way. And I mean, there are 2-3 reasons for that. I think even the feedstock for nuclear reactors, we don't have that in large quantities. We do have some, I think, but there are issues surrounding that, and where the nuclear reactors will be located, that becomes another very big issue, because given that it is such a densely populated country, you have to find its location becomes a very tricky question actually. So we do have a couple of nuclear reactors, but the contribution is, as I said, only 2-3%. Now, the Renault story, I've heard about this, the China case. But right now, there, in fact, for the four-wheelers, there are only two brands that are available in India, and I'm sure that the government and Invest India are looking at these alternative models, but none of them have taken off yet. I mean, in fact, we are also looking at, hybrids. Does even if you don't go the full EV way, can you actually have a hybrid system? But I think things have not taken off. I mean, as far as Some of the bigger car manufacturers, Maruti, for example, they have announced that they are setting up a battery plant, but it will take 2-3 more years, etc. So everything is, it's there in the pipeline, but we are yet to see a product yet. And I'm sure the other car companies are also thinking about how they can enter this space, but as of yet, we haven't seen anything. Right.
See, there is a question by Martin. Please go ahead.
Hello. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
First, I apologize because I came in late. My daughter wouldn't sleep, so maybe it's in the presentation. You mentioned electricity and availability, and I was wondering, in a lot of developing countries, you have the issue that you don't have enough electricity. So how is India doing in that field? Like, do you have blackouts very often, or is it sort of under control? And maybe second question would be, compared to gasoline prices, how expensive or inexpensive is electricity to make electric vehicles attractive for the consumers?
Yeah, so as far as electricity access is concerned, it is a problem. I mean, but by some statistics, 1/3 of the country doesn't have, 1/3 of the people don't have access to electricity. We don't have blackouts in the cities, but that is not the story in rural India. They have, it's not a blackout, it's just that they have power for, or electricity for a limited period of the day. And when they need to, sort of use the power pumps and other kinds of things, and maybe at night. Electricity, the peak demand in India is from 5 to 8 p.m. Because I mean, you cannot use the daylight anymore, and so it's not a shortage of that sense, but there are pockets obviously where there are shortages in that sense. And peak demand is very high, I mean, because so much together. Now your second question about the gasoline prices and whether now it makes sense to, frankly, I think this is something that all countries are grappling with, that, due to the geopolitics, gasoline prices have changed, and as a result, the electricity costs, etc., also have changed. But and we've had the situation, in fact, in June of this year, we had to import coal, despite being such a a large coal producing country, because there was a situation where we did not have enough natural enough coal in the stock in the country, and it was feared at that time that there might be outages because coal was in short supply, so coal had to be imported. But coal is about 55 to 60% of our energy supplied, and 20 to 30% is about renewables. So there's a bit coming from hydroelectricity, and very small amount from nuclear. That's the breakup.
Hey, are there other questions, comments?
Just the link to the presentation on the Gerpisa website is broken.
Really?
No, it's not.
Yes.
Yeah, there is a link. I discovered it today to the report that Saon had sent before, and there's a background. I don't know how. I discovered it this morning.
Okay, so I will check it out.
It doesn't work. On the old side, it worked.
Okay, so there must be a problem. It's about the file file connection. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah.
I get a page not found when I click on the link.
Yeah. So we need to reattach. So we will do that. Sorry, we just figured out that because we have recently shifted the site from a location to another because we have done some updated in the structure. So there are still a few problems like that that might pop up. So we will look into that. Stefan. Stefan, please.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. I haven't studied much about India recently, but I recall 3-4 years ago, I was really interested in how India was integrated into this global value chain. And it seemed that two things went out. First, most of the imports of components came from EU. In fact, 30% of all components for Indian cars are imported from European countries. Then China had a growth and also somewhat a bit Asian, and a decline of Japan and Korea. So here, can you tell us a bit more about what's the positioning of India right now in this global value chain? And it's linked with previous questions, especially when it comes to electrification. Yeah. What might be the solution for importing raw materials or refining it in India? What are the plans from the government? And the second point, we often forget that in India, most of the sales are, well, two-wheelers. I think 3/4 of all the sales are two-wheelers, if I'm not, yeah? Is it the case? Yeah, a very few private cars. So frankly speaking, does it make sense for car makers like the leading ones like Maruti Suzuki to invest hugely in that to reach $5,000 car, which means very upgrading technologies? And as Tommaso tells us, we have already strong rivals in China who can deliver the products. So does it make sense for those makers to invest in private cars development? You told us at the very beginning, now most of the investment are made in buses, but what about two-wheelers? We know that only 3% of the two-wheelers now are electrified in India. Isn't it this trajectory that might make sense? And as Mike told us, perhaps there is not such a huge effort, investment effort or technological efforts to be done to develop batteries for two-wheelers. So I wonder what are the positions of the main car makers in India, foreigners also, but also in the biggest player, Maruti Suzuki. Thank you.
Yes, India's imports in automobiles, there are very some parts which are imported, and the way it has worked actually is that there are some parts, for example, that Maruti imports from Japan, and Hyundai has done the same from South Korea. But there are other parts which we have imported from EU and some from Thailand also. But in comparison to the total value addition in a ICE engine, ICE car, this is only about 5% of the total value addition. It's a very small amount. It's actually, but that's not the story actually in EV, because the cost of the battery is about 65%, and so if you are importing either the kit for the battery or the battery itself, given that you're not making the batteries in the country, you're only assembling them, imports are a problem. The one other problem that we have is that the tariffs on all of these, most of these components are quite high. And some of the car manufacturers have raised this issue with the government also. So, you're right that two-wheelers are, in comparison to all the two-wheelers that are there, EV two-wheelers are very few. It's very small amount. It is about 3%, yes. Now, Now, does it make sense for, Maruti to make a car, expensive car, EV car? Now, I would actually posit the question in a different way, that when Suzuki actually set up the factory in the 80s, did it make sense to make a car in India at that time? It did not, perhaps. But here we are today. So given that you have to change with the time, and I think most of the car manufacturers recognize that it is a risky investment, it is a huge investment, and they're going to perhaps test it by going maybe the two-wheeler route first, and then go on to cars, because we haven't really seen many of the four-wheeler companies actually saying that we are setting up a factory for, barring one or two, that kind of investment hasn't happened, or we don't see announcement of those plans yet. So people are also testing it and seeing whether there is an appetite. There seems to be more of an appetite, again, because of the price issue, for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, but obviously not for cars, because they are really, really expensive.
Okay, thank you.
I still have, because this question about different questions that arise to me. Yes, so you can see me, sorry. I put my camera again on me. Because you rightly point out that if your energy supply is coal mainly, then the benefit of electrification is more. So basically, you need to make a bet on electrification by saying, well, we create electric cars, hoping that in the meantime, the share of coal will decrease, and so the trade-off will be positive. So that is creative first uncertainty. Now, the second one is how serious is India about banning a certain part of time internal combustion engine? Because I've heard India declaring a certain part of time that in 2004 to 2045, they would like to have more. But if you don't have a regulation like you don't have in Europe or you have in California, that says to car makers, well, a certain part of time, you will not be able to sell these cars anymore, then nothing happens, or very few happens, because the trade-off, the costs that you add to a car, and if consumers are not forced to choose the electric cars because of that reason, then we see that even in Europe or United States, you wouldn't even today have a market for electric cars. So the role of the state is crucial in giving subsidies to promote it and creating regulation to stop it, and then invest in also promoting the green of the energy. Otherwise, you don't get, you get benefit in terms of air pollution, but right. It's not for that you do all these huge investments. So this is the kind of, so it's clear that the government has a central role to play into that. And thinking about this question about the cost of gasoline versus the cost of energy. Now, if you want to decrease coal and you make investments, that is possibly going to increase the cost of energy, because this investment, it's not that using coal at the same time. So that in terms of how you tax carbon and the kind of economy you built around the green. And at the same time, so the old developed world reduce the consumption of oil because the shift to electrification is already doing, then more oil will become available. And probably the oil producer will still be looking for car industry that are underdeveloped to sell this oil at cheaper price. So I guess once again, it is really the state and the political will that will define whether or not this is possible, because you need to invest in greening the energy. You need to give subsidies to keep it a low cost. You need to prevent cheap oil to disrupt that on economic terms, and you need to force car makers to sell these cars. So what is the central government? How do you think the central government will be able to impose this way?
Right. So we haven't, I think, reached the stage where EVs can be only mandated. But I think two things have been done. One is that so similar to the Euro norms, we have what is called the Bharat stage norms, the emission norms. So in fact, India went from, this is for gasoline cars and diesel cars. So India went from Bharat stage 4 and to Bharat stage 6. So it's bypassed one of the stages because more stricter emission norms came in as far as gasoline cars is concerned. The second thing India has done is that as far as diesel cars are concerned, because in fact diesel cars are more polluting, the number of years in which you can have a diesel car, there is a strict limitation on that. Only 10 years in the major metros, things like that. So on the emission side, what is India is trying to do is bring in these kinds of regulations, and but mandating that only EVs would be sold is, I think, it doesn't make sense given the stage that we are in. Only 3% say of two-wheelers are EV and hardly any four-wheelers. So we haven't reached that stage. But obviously the thing is that you have to have a vision, and I think the NEMMP, the National Mobility Mission, and the mission for the renewables, the transport mobility plans, all of these are going to come together and try to sort of move the transport system to greener options. But there are so many other issues also involved. I mean, geopolitics for one, and given that India imports both natural gas, as well as so there are as well as oil, petroleum and gasoline. There's a huge burden that India bears in terms of its energy. India is actually its energy is dependent on imports, largely dependent on imports. I mean, even coal we have to import from time to time, like what happened this year. So there seems to be a plan, and if all of this comes together, surely we will move in that direction. But I think as far as mandating EVs, we have not reached that stage yet, given that we neither have the technology nor do we have the raw materials. It would be very difficult to do that at this stage. But definitely a few years from now, when we have the capacity or the schemes that have been announced, the PLI, etc., if they take off, we might be in a position after a couple of years to at least set some norms, but not there yet.
Okay, perhaps Lorenza, you want to wrap up, because I think we are reaching the end of the 2 hours, and it's really late in some places where people are connecting from now, like in Japan, for instance. But shouldn't be too early in India as well, if I'm not wrong. So perhaps you can speak from there in theory, or try.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, just to thank you very much again, Saon. We learned a lot from your presentation. As I said, we also look forward to seeing your research further developing, and we hope you will present the updates that will follow. As all of you might have seen, we have a full program of seminars, once a month in French, once a month in English, that you can join from your locations. So we will have other two in November. We hope to see you again, and yeah, you can get in touch with us for further developments. Thank you very much again, Saon, and to all of you that connected. Bye-bye. Enjoy your weekend. See you at the next seminar.
Bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Okay. I'll put the end to the recording.